Welcome to episode 52 of the Bass Shed podcast. My name's Ryan Roberts. My guest is Matthias Heyman. Matthias has compiled, written, researched the book on Jimmie Blanton, right? Legendary bass icon, Jimmie Blanton. Most notably, his few years with the Duke Ellington Orchestra. Jimmie Blanton is, I think, a highly underrated figure in jazz history. And it was great to connect with Matthias about his extensive research on compiling the book on Jimmie Blanton. www.dlakenbasses.com. Dan Laken, building custom basses, the bass of your dreams. Contact Dan. Let him know what your interests are in creating your custom bass, and Dan and his design team would be more than happy to accommodate your wishes for building the bass of your dreams. Visit www.dlakenbasses.com. Dan is also a distributor for Demeter amp heads. I love mine. If you remember the last episode where I had to recite basically the Gettysburg Address when reading the product number, it is the VTBP-M-800D. I love mine. Visit www.dlakenbasses.com. Trickfish Amps. That's right. Go to trickfishamps.com. Enter the promo code TheBassShed for 10% off. I've been playing the preamp, the Minnow. I love it. It works great on electric, great on upright. I wish it would pick up more steam in the upright world. That's what I really want to see happen for Trickfish. Go to trickfishamps.com. Promo code TheBassShed, 10% off. Definitely check out the Minnow. I'm going to be playing some of their cabs coming up here pretty soon. I'm looking forward to that, and I will report back shortly. Until then, trickfishamps.com. Use the promo code TheBassShed for 10% off. While you're on the internet and saving money, you should probably also go over to Tsunami Cables. Enter the promo code TheBassShed for 10% off there too. I love their cables. I was honored to connect with Keith on the last episode of the podcast, episode 51. You can learn more about the company. You can learn more about the Tsunami V15 tube preamp, which is fantastic. If you love Ampeg, right? If you love Ampeg, you're going to want to check out this preamp, the V15. It's got all the modeling of the B15, the Ampeg B15. It's got the 60s. It's got the 70s. You can put them together to create your own hybrid B15 sound with the Tsunami V15. So go to tsunamicables.com, enter the promo code TheBassShed for 10% off. lemurmusic.com. Everything you need for the double bass can be found at lemurmusic.com. Stop by their website, snoop around, see what you need for the double bass, and lemurmusic.com. Place your order, and with that comes the promo code to get free transcriptions at the Bass Shed. So lemurmusic.com. As I mentioned on the episode, is Matthias Heyman. You can go to mattheyman.com, MATTHEYMAN.com to learn more about him. I was really interested to connect with him because he has written the book, Revolutionizing the Jazz Bass, The Life and Music of Jimmie Blanton. Now, a couple years ago, it feels like a couple years ago, I wrote a blog post that you can find on the Bass Shed about Jimmie Blanton. And my personal interest was not only about Blanton, but to put Blanton in context, right? So then I had to know the nature of what was happening before him and talk about that so that we could understand why his inventions and who he was as a musical personality was so significant. I'm really interested in Blanton, and during my time doing some research, which was not at all as extensive as Matthias's, there's not a lot out there. I kept running into the same kind of profile, write up on Jimmie Blanton, and Matthias has spent 6 years researching Jimmie Blanton, and we'll speak about that, his findings. He's working out the publication deal right now. He'll also speak about that. He'll speak about his history as a bass player, as a double bass player, his history as teaching jazz history, all of which I'm interested in, right? I love the history of the bass. I love jazz history. Obviously I love the bass itself. So it was great to connect with Matthias because he's doing all the things. He's doing all the things that fascinate me about this stuff. And he's got some really cool stories about people he was able to connect with during his research on Jimmie Blanton. And we'll hear from him about that. It's fantastic. And I'm really, really excited to actually read the book once it gets published. And I will be talking more about that as that comes to pass. You can also stop by his website for some excerpts of the book. The website is mattheyman.com, MATTHEYMAN.com. Go to the tab that is Pitter, Panter, Chatter. And that's where you can find some excerpts of the book. And that's what I have on it. It's time to hear from Matthias himself. Here's my talk with Matthias Heyman. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm fine. All things considered, my definition of fine nowadays is healthy.
Yeah, right. Just the basics. You got the basics down.
Yeah. No, but overall, I can't complain. I mean, we had a rather rough time last year. Not us personally, but the whole country.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Globally, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, globally, yeah, certainly, yeah. Absolutely.
So you're in Belgium.
Yeah.
Cool.
Right.
What's the nature of things now as it relates to COVID? How are things doing over there now?
We're doing pretty good, actually. We are still on the downslope hill of what was a minor third wave.
Oh wow!
We were pretty fortunate to, compared to some of our neighboring countries, they had a really big third wave, and we were able to put that off due to mostly, the mask mandate has been, it's kind of universal here in Belgium, and everybody follows it. So there's not a lot of debate on that, and social distancing and whatnot. And vaccination is slow, but it's steady in terms of progress. So my guess is that, well, it's not a guess. It's based on kind of the anticipation given by the government. I'm probably due for my first dose in a month or so.
Okay. So they did it. I mean, here in Los Angeles, and I don't even know the rest of America, but they were doing it in waves, first responders type people, nurses, people, and they got them and the elderly were eligible first, and then it opened up kind of by age, and now everybody's available. You could just go get it. And I get alerts on my phone that Uber and Lyft will give you free rides to go get vaccinated. Now it's all being outsourced that way, I guess.
Yeah. No, it's the same here, but they haven't actually finished 60 years old. So it's kind of the age they're doing now. But now it's supposed to go rather fast, from more or less this point on. It depends, because there's today there was just an announcement that the J&J, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, was there was some issues with it, and they were not giving it to anyone under the age of 40, I think it was.
Oh wow!
So, the whole system shifted again, and some people that were scheduled to get a dose had to be rescheduled and whatnot. So, but overall, I think in about a month's time, I guess it's probably our age group.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say young, but youngish.
Yeah. Right. How old are you?
I'm 38. Actually.
38. Okay. I'm 39. We're in the same ballpark.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Great.
Yeah. Man, I checked out your site. You got some exciting stuff up there. I want to start with your history as a musician. So, when did you start playing the bass, and was the bass your first instrument?
Yeah. The bass was actually my first instrument. For a really brief period when I was, I guess, 14 or so, I picked up the electric bass, and I guess the same way that a lot of bassists start, out of necessity. I wasn't a musician at all, but my friends played in a band, and obviously it was cool to join the band. So, what instrument are you offered? Hey, here you go. You play the bass. Right?
right.
So, I wasn't really doing anything particularly good or decent in terms of technique. So I just got by. I kind of left the electric bass for a long time, and then by the age of 16, 17, I still don't really know how or why, but was attracted to an album of that had a bass on the cover, and it actually was a classical album. It was Bottesini, or sonata, or some of his classical work.
Who is the player who is the performer for the Bottesini stuff?
I think it was Ludwig Streicher.
Okay.
Yeah, it was one of the older, the kind of 60s, 70s generation of performers with a lot of, the really heavy sound. But yeah, I really remember it was a free day from school, and I remember listening to that record, which I picked up again. I don't know for which reason. And I remember calling my mother, who was at work, and saying like, "Hey, I figured out what I want to do.
Yeah,
I want to become a bass player." And obviously she was, why? Because you can't read music. I couldn't read music at the time. We don't have any musicians in the family.
Sure,
but yeah, the mystery of the bass, I guess.
Man, I think that's it, because I think back to my early days playing. I heard my dad's friend play electric bass, and all of a sudden the music became alive once he added bass to it, and it was the mystery of it. Like, I was kind of captivated by how did that happen? Like, why did this one instrument just breathe all this life into the music? Now I have to figure out how to do that. So you're right, it was the mystery for me too, and it's been we're still doing it, still trying to figure it out. And so getting in because of Bottesini and hearing Bottesini's compositions, I'm sure that sent you down the classical route for quite some time.
Yeah, exactly. So I had a great fortune of having a really supportive teacher, and he actually, even though that I started studying music when I was like 16, 17 years old, he did enable me to go to a conservatoire.
Okay.
Like really higher education. And by the age of 18, so the entrance exam was a disaster, but still they gave me a shot at it. And so that was really the start for me for about 3 years of studying and playing double bass in mostly the classical scene. And I had the great fortune of being in a really rich environment in terms of musicians and opportunities, and being able to go to workshops and masterclasses, playing under the baton of some great conductors and playing in some amazing concert venues. At the time you kind of undergo it, and later, at my age, you look back at it and you think, wow, did that happen?
Yeah. Right.
Playing Sacre du Printemps, The Rite of Spring by Stravinsky,
sure,
under the baton of Reinbert de Leeuw in the Concertgebouw in Amsterdam and things like that. With student orchestra still, but that just to be in a kind of hallowed hall and play some crazy music there. So that was quite a kick in the head.
Yeah, very cool. And then, at what point did you get into jazz?
Well, that's connected to kind of the story, the anecdote I just had with the Sacre du Printemps and Reinbert de Leeuw, because that was actually as part of a summer program, an orchestral program, the National Youth Orchestra in the Netherlands.
Okay.
So I auditioned, and lo and behold, I got accepted. Well, I was the seventh or eighth bassist of in the section, but I was happy nonetheless.
Yeah.
And it really was a kind of international orchestra. I mean, it's officially the youth orchestra of the Netherlands, but I guess about half of them are people from abroad, students from abroad. And so it was like, I think it was a month where just the whole orchestra stayed together and did all kinds of projects, ranging from playing early music on period instruments, other people playing in 21st century orchestra, playing modern composition, contemporary compositions. And then there was the large symphony orchestra, which played Sacre du Printemps, Shostakovich symphony and whatnot. But there were a lot of Americans in the band as well, including some bass players, some trumpet players and whatnot. And late at night, they started jamming, in the youth hostel where the whole orchestra stayed. And that kind of triggered, this kind of second moment where you are completely in awe of what is happening. What are they doing? They're kind of playing, and I mean, it's kind of a cliche, but for me, it really seemed at the time like they're pulling notes out of the air.
Yeah.
And they didn't have music in front of them, and they just seemed to be able to go on forever. And I came back from that summer course, got back to conservatoire, and I had to disappoint my teacher in telling him, like, okay, man, I gotta go and study jazz now.
Yeah.
I'm moving over to the dark side. And he was upset, but in the end, he was okay with it, because he actually played a lot of jazz when he was a young man. So he was
okay.
Yeah.
And then, so did you get in with a jazz teacher at that point, or were you learning just from records, or both?
No, actually, I switched conservatoires. I first was at the Royal Conservatoire in Brussels, which still has a good reputation in terms of classical music. But in terms of jazz music, there were a lot of friends of me that advised me to go to the Conservatory of Antwerp, where they, for example, had two bass teachers, so you could kind of shift between them. And so that's what I did. And so after those 3 years of studying classical bass, I did another 5 years, so a bachelor and a master of studying jazz bass. And then finally, at a rather mature age compared to many of my friends, finally graduated.
And then you continued to pursue your education in jazz bass.
Yeah. So I kind of left the classical bass entirely for what it was. In a way, I kind of regret it. It's something that at that time wasn't really done. I mean, you kind of picked a side, really. You were a classical bassist or a jazz bassist. I later saw, in for example, some friends of mine in the Netherlands, some American friends, they combine, and it's totally fine. But at that time, it didn't occur to me that it was okay to combine, and you were actually able to combine. So yeah. But,
yeah, I think so. I mean, they all do. I think, and maybe you'd agree, maybe not, but anything you study musically always helps facilitate the other thing. Like you're just growing your musicianship. But when you're learning techniques and you're learning style and something that's so historically and rhythmically and harmonically dense like jazz, I felt like when I started, like you just kind of got to dive right into it to try to figure out what all this is. And I didn't want to be preoccupied with trying to deal with my bow technique too while I'm trying to figure out how to play these chords. So I chose a lane and haven't made it back to classical yet.
Yeah.
But I'd like to.
I'm really glad I had both experiences because, even later on when I kind of got into music history, kind of helped me to understand, I taught jazz history for a long time to music minors and majors, performance students, and they, kind of helped me to understand that they didn't necessarily have that background in classical music, and I was able to kind of tie both of those genres, if you will, together and kind of explain, this is what you can get out of classical music. You don't necessarily need to like it, you don't necessarily need to play it, but know about it, and this is what you can get out of it that will help you pursue your career as a jazz performer.
Sure. Now, when you would teach jazz history, how would you go about teaching that? Like, there's a lot of books out there on it. I've read some of them. There's the going down the rabbit hole of just like records, but then you're dealing with recorded technology too. And so like some of these guys aren't always documented on albums.
Yeah.
For their place in jazz history.
Yeah, well, for me, it was always important to kind of combine two major things. First of all, given the fact that I was teaching performance students, I obviously wanted them to know the kind of performance side of the history and know all the major names and some of the records, and try to kind of get them to understand what is so interesting in historical terms, but also in contemporaneous terms, with some of those historical records. I mean, why is listening to, for example, Louis Armstrong, why is that still relevant for you today as a musician? So that definitely was the first thing. And then given the fact that, I was teaching Belgian students for the better part, and also to some degree Dutch students, it was also really important to kind of give them a broader context. So that they could understand, everybody understood that, okay, this is music that originates in America, in the Black American experience. But for me, it was really interesting to put it in a wider context and help them explain how all of these experiences, how societal and cultural and technological changes influence the music, and to some degree vice versa. So that was always kind of this dual kind of thing that I tried to do, that I always liked, as a teacher, to have a bit of both, like technical things, like, okay, what is he playing here, and but on the other hand also why. I mean, what could it be that is happening out there in society that influenced him or her into playing this particular thing? Sure.
And I think dealing with so much of that, and I mean, we're going to spend some time talking about Jimmie Blanton here in a second, but that also is a direct connection to Duke and the Harlem Renaissance and all that. And so when you're talking about the history of jazz music and what was happening in America racially, this music seeming to be the pushback, against the establishment musically. What I get interested in, I'm getting sidetracked here, but is jazz music today doesn't seem to have the same cultural significance that I feel like it did. And I feel like once it really got institutionalized, it lost something. And that's, I'd love to have like some older guys on the podcast speak to that. Like I'd love to hear from Ron Carter about that. But guys who were actually in it back in the day. And after studying the history of it so much, and then listening to modern records, you yourself, what's your take on that? And what's your take on that as not living in the States? Because that's a different perspective also.
Yeah, it's true. For me, it's I kind of see different things happening, and of course a lot of it is influenced by my own perspective and my own interests. But the music today that I really enjoy listening to in an international context or in an American context is our performances that are really informed by history.
Sure.
I really enjoy Jason Moran, for example, because he knows the history of not just jazz, but of American music and the whole American experience inside out.
Sure.
And at the same time, he's there with the current. He has some of those wonderful kind of multimedial, if you will, multidisciplinary projects. I remember something that he did together with skateboarders, the skaters, and he was playing music at the same time. So I love this idea, and you have it with a lot of other bands like the Bad Plus,
sure.
For example, and how they kind of take something out of that history, but it doesn't sound outdated. It doesn't sound old-fashioned at all. It sounds like it could have happened or written or composed or played yesterday.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the thing that I really enjoy listening to, and for me it's not the only thing out there. I'm aware of that, but that for me is kind of the most significant music relating to your earlier comment on, is it still significant or not? And you do see some of those artists reacting to that and kind of tying into earlier ideas of music as protest. I'm also thinking like Terence Blanchard, Kristen Scott, and all those guys that kind of make these political, if you will, statements through their music.
Sure.
Just like Mingus did in the day and Ellington did in the day. I don't really see a whole lot of that in if I look at the Belgian context. We see a little bit of that, but obviously we don't have, we obviously have a lot of problems here. We have a lot of racism. We have a lot of extreme right, and we have a lot of things that are not going the way that I at least think they should be going.
Sure.
And we have institutionalized racism the same way that the United States has it, but it's not as prominent. It's not as visible in society.
Okay.
Quite simply because of the way that our societies in itself is a very kind of homogeneous in terms of skin color.
Mm-hmm.
As we don't have we had protests relating to Black Lives Matter, but you didn't see a whole lot of Black people marching in those protests, quite simply because there's not that kind of number of people here.
Was that a movement in Belgium? Was that triggered by George Floyd here in America?
Yeah.
Did that all happen around the same time?
Yeah. It happened around the same time.
Because if I remember correctly, and I could be way off, and I don't want to offend anybody, but I think the BLM movement was kind of already established before George Floyd, but then really that kind of inflamed the movement. Yeah, not to use that word in a negative sense, but that really got it. It picked up some steam there. Yeah, that's definitely the word. It really became a major thing, and also like quite recently when the verdict came out, that was also like national news here in Belgium. Sure,
it was really followed and still is followed. I think it was today that I read that President Biden will meet with the family of George Floyd. So these things are still picked up by the press here. So those are moments when you see that these issues do kind of live in our society, if you will. but it still feels like, this is happening elsewhere. This is happening abroad.
Right.
Well, a lot of this is happening here as well, and we had our, Leopold II and the whole thing with Congo, which obviously is terrible. But it still seems like, this was the past, or this is happening abroad. So in terms of the impact on societal elements or societal developments, and the impact that it has on music, I don't see that direct connection the same way that I see with some of these artists that I mentioned in the States.
Yeah. So, I think there's always going to be artists who choose to respond artistically to society. I think jazz musicians, popular musicians, I do think across the board. Yeah, I don't know. It kind of dawned on me a few years ago that comedians in the States, like American comedians, seem to be doing more of it than American musicians. And I've actually wanted to talk to comedians about that, with the idea of like, are stand-up comedians kind of the new musician? Musicians used to do this, and now musicians don't regularly. I'm not going to say none of them do, but for the entirety of music, a small percentage might respond culturally and politically, but stand-up comedians seem to do it a lot more, and I think that's fascinating. That the voice for the change is landing somewhere else, so it's not being driven by the musician.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I also wonder whether it's maybe some kind of historical distortion, in the sense that the small percentage of musicians that were kind of protesting through music are the ones that we remember today. And then maybe the large, the bulk of them really didn't.
Right.
But we don't really talk about them anymore because, this kind of what they did was perhaps aesthetically very pleasing, but politically not very relevant.
Sure.
Maybe it's that as well,
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Maybe it's always been this percentage, and only the ones that had a, what you just said, the ones that made stronger statements are the ones that are remembered.
Yeah.
That's absolutely accurate. Now, you're also a researcher.
Yeah.
What is your history with research? And I'm fascinated, and I like doing research, but I don't do it in any kind of professional setting. Mm-hmm. Just for my own amusement. What got you into that specifically? And then what were some other projects besides the Blanton book? I've read some of your other articles on your website. Some of them are very fascinating. How'd you get into research on that level? Not just as a hobby.
Well, it started out as a hobby, as so many other things do.
Sure.
For me, being really fascinated by history, particularly music history and the history of jazz. So I began teaching that. I had the opportunity of teaching that. Reading a lot, like, you mentioned at the beginning, you also read a lot of history books, as did I. But at a certain point, I figured, this is all really nice, but I want to contribute something as well. I don't want to be that, what sometimes is in a kind of condescending way called the armchair historian.
Sure.
So, I wanted to really participate in this process of writing about history and finding out more about it, including things that hadn't been really written about. So at first, I kind of, for a brief moment, figured, okay, maybe I should go to Rutgers University in Newark, where they have an MA, a master's program in research and jazz history.
Okay.
But that, for a number of reasons, financial reasons, practical reasons, was impossible. So I kind of got the second best thing, if you will. Although maybe at this, in retrospect, this is probably the best route. And that was starting a PhD.
Okay.
And The idea really was to combine my two strong interests, and that was history and bass playing.
Mm-hmm.
So on the crossroads, I came across Blanton. So that's kind of how I got into that. And then, during the PhD, which was entirely focused on Blanton, my PhD, which ran between 2012 and 2018.
Mm-hmm.
I also got kind of what I always like to call hobbies. Sometimes you really want to go to a conference, an academic conference, because there's some interesting speakers, or sometimes it's just a kind of really silly reason, like hey, I've never been to this town or city and it sounds like a cool place. So how do I participate if the theme isn't right? If I can't figure out a something to talk about in terms of Blanton or bass playing or whatnot. So I started digging into Belgian jazz history. So it's kind of a second research interest of mine. And I've been doing some research in that respect, mostly on interwar developments, like the whole early jazz and swing here in Belgium, and how it connects to everything else that is happening in Belgium and abroad. So that's one interest, and that interest, which again started as kind of a hobby, eventually after my PhD, which focused on Blanton, became my major focus, or kind of became the inspiration, if you will, for my major focus on my next project, which I'm doing at this moment, my 3-year postdoctoral project, which focuses on jazz competitions.
Okay.
So when the inspiration really came from discovering that already in the 30s, there were a whole series of jazz competitions in Belgium. And I was really fascinated by this idea of already in the 1930s, a small nation, and several nations actually in Europe, holding jazz competitions, which I didn't really seem to find a lot of in the States. So that kind of led to the question, why jazz competitions? Is there something there that is missing in European nations of that time, that triggered them into organizing these competitions?
The only thing I can think of that would relate to the States would be maybe the downbeat readers poll that could kind of turn the music into some kind of competition. I hadn't known of any, like the Monk Institute or any of those things, or now it's the Hancock Institute. Those competitions I hadn't known the history of going back, or anything like that, obviously, going back that far. But downbeat, having that kind of readers poll, I wonder if that was, through your research, was that an impetus to it? Was downbeat getting over there, getting across the Atlantic? Was that in Belgium?
No, not really. I mean, occasionally you would find somebody who had a connection in the States and who could kind of, smuggle is the wrong word, but it kind of was able to find a few copies, but it wasn't widespread.
Sure.
But there was a wide network within Europe, so a lot of European nations had their own jazz magazines. Some of them even dating way back before Downbeat was established.
Okay. Downbeat was 38? I forget. I know it was the 30s. I forgot what year specifically.
Yeah. It's something like that, like late 30s, I guess, or mid 30s perhaps.
Okay.
But, by 1930-31, Belgium already had like a dedicated jazz magazine.
Oh wow!
And there were some other nations like the Netherlands, also early 30s, and I'm thinking the UK with the Melody Maker already had one earlier. I'm blanking on the exact dates and chronology of it all, but it does seem from the research that before we had actually the first American jazz magazines, that a series of European or some European nations already had their own jazz magazines, probably out of necessity. You know, how are you able to kind of collect all that information? Easiest way is through a magazine, I guess.
Sure. Circling back to your work on Blanton, so you worked from 2012 to 2018 on your doctorate. How much of that time, that was all, those 6 years were all researching Blanton?
Yeah. I was very fortunate to be able to get a major grant for that.
Okay.
So that wasn't full time. It was an 80% job, and the 20% was dedicated to teaching, as I said before, mostly jazz history. It does kind of equate, let's say, a full-time 4-year PhD.
Yeah. I did a little bit, definitely not 4 years or 6 years worth of research on Blanton, but it's easy to find some stuff, and it's not easy to find other stuff. Where were you finding? What were a lot of your source materials? Where were you finding a lot of that stuff?
Well, there's a lot of. Okay, so if we go back to the beginning, I kind of had the same problem in the sense that I was finding kind of the same biography, for example,
exactly,
over and over again. Like you could kind of summarize it on 1 or 2 pages, and that seemed to be it. It seemed to be like that's all there is. That's all we know about him.
Sure.
One of the things that I wanted to know more about, because how can you be such an iconic figure and yet be so enigmatic? You know.
Yeah.
So I began to really connect with a lot of people.
Okay.
That were already doing some research into Ellington and Blanton, not professional researchers, not academic people working at universities, but just major fans that dedicate all of their time and money into just buying everything they can find on Ellington, and that got me started. So some of those people had already collected newspaper articles from obscure newspapers back in the 30s and 40s, and that kind of already you could begin to see new information popping up from those sources.
Okay.
But then basically, in terms of his biography, the most important sources, besides newspapers, I also looked at Downbeat and a number of other jazz magazines from that era. Besides that, a really, really amazing source for me in terms of Blanton's biography, and especially his early life before he joined Ellington in 1939, was, and you may not believe this, but was the bassist Richard Davis.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Richard Davis, we all know Richard, and he's still among us, and he had a rough patch in terms of his health, but he's doing better now, I've been told. So, and we all know him from like his really avant-garde bass work. Eric Dolphy and Andrew Hill, the whole Blue Note 60s kind of vibe.
Sure. Where's work with Coltrane?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But as a young man, really, even as a kid, really, like 14, 15 years old, he was a big Blanton fan. Well, he still is. But at that point, he had the really great idea of trying to find Blanton's relatives. And he started writing with Blanton's older sister.
Okay.
And eventually started interviewing her. And he, or rather some of his assistants, let's say. I mean, they're really friends of his, but people that work with him were able to digitize those tapes. There were still cassette tapes made in the 80s, and letters dating back to really the 60s and 50s when Richard was still a kid, and got them over to me. So that was a major source of finding a first-hand witness, really. The older sister explaining all of this stuff, like, this is what Brother was like. That was the nickname they gave him, Brother.
Okay.
And that was really an amazing moment when I first heard all of those wonderful anecdotes and stories about Blanton as a kid and a youngster.
Yeah. Now, was this Blanton's younger sister?
The older sister.
Sister. Okay.
Yeah. So you got an older sister. She was 2 years older. She's no longer among us. That's Dorothy. Mm-hmm. Dottie, as they call her. And the younger sister, she's actually 10 years younger.
Okay.
And I'm not in contact with her, but I knew somebody who was in contact with her. He lost contact, but a couple of years ago, she was still alive. Okay. She was 10 years younger. So her memory was entirely different because, she only knew him rather briefly before he already left with the Ellington band.
Yeah. Right. Have you been to any of the sites? Have you gone to, his, where he was buried, or have you gone to his hometown, or have you come to America to check out any of be in the space that are, Blanton spots?
Unfortunately, I haven't been able to go to Chattanooga, which was where he was born and spent the first 14, 15 years of his life. Also not Nashville. He went to Tennessee State College in Nashville, and also not St. Louis, which is where he kind of spent his first professional years before being drafted by Ellington.
Yeah, on the steamboats.
So unfortunately, sorry?
He was on the steamboats out of there, right?
He was also on the steamboats, yeah. Although not the Mississippi, because he in the summer months he played a lot with Fate Marable,
right?
And we all know Fate from the 1920s when he had Louis Armstrong in his band, and we're on the steamboats plying up the Mississippi River. But this is the 30s, so this is the second half of the 30s, and at that point, Fate Marable is no longer down in New Orleans, but he's where is it again? I think that he kind of is it the Ohio River that kind of trails off the Mississippi? I'm not entirely sure, but he no longer does the up the Mississippi River route of the steamboats, but there's another cruise, if you will, and in the band was Blanton.
Yeah, and that's where he was kind of really getting some of that together. I remember the piece, the thing I wrote about Blanton was I wanted to put Blanton in context. So why were these innovations so groundbreaking? The only way we can understand his impact is by understanding what came before him.
Yeah. Exactly.
So my aim was a little bit, I started out kind of wanting to do what you've done, which is really just focus on Blanton. But then my own psyche got me sidetracked. I'm like, well, we need to create a baseline, no pun intended, for what he built off of and where he came from and why this was so revolutionary, and it was a very short amount of time. It had been tuba all the way up into that. And then Duke Ellington and everybody Duke was bringing in, he was bringing in bass players. I want to say Wellman Broad was the first.
Yeah, it was the first string bassist.
Yeah, and then he
had tuba players.
Yeah, and I think Wellman was still doubling sometimes.
A little bit, but not that much.
Yeah.
I got a chapter. It's really interesting what you say, because I had the exact same thing while I was doing my research on Blanton. It was like, we don't really have like the definite history book on early jazz bass play.
Right.
There's lots of myths and misunderstandings. One of the things that you read a lot is about Walter Page being the inventor of the walking.
Yeah.
Go back to recordings. In 1924, 25, 6, and hear people playing walking bass.
Mm-hmm.
So but obviously I do agree that he kind of popularized the whole concept.
Walter Page.
There's a distinction there between discovering it or originating it and disseminating it or popularizing it.
Sure.
So I had the same problem, and so I spent a lot of time researching 1920s and 30s jazz bass playing, and some of it definitely found its way into the perspective book. For example, the two best examples is I got two sub chapters, so sections of a larger chapter, in which I talk about all the pre-Blanton bassists in the Ellington band.
Yeah,
and I try to make a case also for when Blanton joined. He kind of stood on the shoulders of those that came before him.
Yes.
And the same applies to Ellington. I mean, he didn't discover Blanton. Well, he didn't discover him, but he didn't came across Blanton in 39 and said, oh, okay, now I'm going to write for the bass because, now I all of a sudden realized that I got to do this and I know how to do it. You find a lot of the kind of conceptual frameworks that he uses Blanton in already in earlier compositions of his, and you can find some of the kind of framings of using the bass in a call and response context. The bass versus the band. You can already hear that in earlier work with, for example, Wellman Bro, Billy Taylor, Hayes Elvis. Those are kind of the three key bassists prior to Blanton.
Yeah, I think
so I try to get that in the book to some degree.
Just that in general, I mean, that could be its own book. Just the bassist of Ellington, because Ellington always seemed to be the trendsetter, with who he was bringing in the band, and definitely within the bass role too. Like he was always at the forefront of what was happening at that end with the bass.
That's absolutely right. Yeah.
And all those people that were a part of that to whatever degree during the timeline, and then Blanton kind of being one of the strongest. Definitely one of the strongest figures in it because of what he was doing as a soloist, which was completely new and still it's fantastic. I mean, I love that stuff, like I've listened to those records and I've transcribed it. Super cool. Like go through the lines and like break it down, and like there's some really cool stuff there that it's still. I remember hearing. I mean, I've always kind of known the name Jimmie Blanton just from being in the bass world. And then I remember watching some YouTube clip with the bass player Eric Revis. And he played through something. And I remember on the clip, he's just like, that's Jimmie Blanton. Everybody needs to know Jimmie Blanton. And I'm like, oh, okay. But then like that spent me more time checking out Blanton. And then after transcribing him and maybe you'd agree with this, it's kind of that initial mystery that I had with the bass, I had about Blanton. It's like I had to figure this out. He's this very, he's 3 years, made a huge impact. Doesn't quite get the recognition I think he deserves within the scope of jazz bass. And some of that's because there's not a lot of resources to know. That's it's hard to track down some of these things. When building your book, you went from his early life all the way until his death, and that's a lot of digging. That's a lot of, that is true research, my friend. Well done.
It was just a lot of fun, I can tell you that.
Yeah. Yeah. How much?
Still is. Yeah.
You still, well, you're done with Blanton, right? What are you working on now, research-wise?
Well, I'm not entirely done with Blanton in terms of, the book that we're talking about now for some time is actually still in the process of being written.
Okay.
To kind of frame it correctly, I wrote a dissertation on Blanton, but the dissertation is like it's. How many words is it? I can't remember, but it's I got it right here. Obviously, the listeners can't see it, but
yeah,
it's a whopper.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I mean, that looks like a straight up textbook. How many pages is that? What's the page count?
That's 356 pages.
Oof.
Now the thing is that kind of has everything I could find on Blanton.
Okay.
Every minor detail. I mean, the only thing it doesn't have is how tall he was and how much he weighed, which I found out later, by the way.
How tall was he?
I don't know by heart, but I got his. Somebody found his draft card for Second World War.
Oh,
okay. He wasn't drafted, but you had to kind of make it. You had to go to some kind of office and get registered to be drafted.
Right.
But obviously he was already hospitalized before he could be drafted. That's where his height and his weight and whatnot was recorded. But the issue is, so I then had to get a publisher to publish the dissertation.
Sure.
But you and we probably don't agree with the assessment that Jimmie Blanton is a minor jazz figure. But in the eyes of a publisher, in my case, Oxford University Press, it is a minor figure. So they didn't want to publish everything.
Okay.
And so what I'm doing right now is first I have to cut a lot of stuff out there, a lot of details and anecdotes that are not going to make the final cut.
Are you going to release two versions, like the full version and then like the version that they're willing to publish? Or why not, with all the resources available, just self-publish?
Well, that's kind of the there's two things here. First of all, in terms of self-publishing, as an academic, because my main gig is being a scholar, being an academic. Oxford University Press is if you will, the Blue Note of publishers in the academic world. So that's like a major gig, if you will. Yeah. While self-publish, it's there's nothing wrong with self-publishing, but it doesn't count for your CV, if you will. It doesn't count for any kind of. You don't get any recognition.
Right. No street cred.
No street cred within the academic community, anyhow. So that's the first thing, and the second thing is also that I really need the publisher because I got a lot of things in terms of permissions.
Sure.
And it's a
so the publisher is going to deal with all the back ends of securing the rights of.
Well, not exactly. I got to do that.
That seems like that's another 6 years.
Yeah, it's difficult. And that's also the thing, with the book, it's kind of, I just let loose everything I had, and I just, if I wanted to transcribe, it's filled with transcriptions. Cool. And sometimes it's like, it's maybe 8 bars, but it flies by in 2 seconds on the record. And, I just figured, okay, let's put it in there. That's not going to be possible in the book. Because for those bars, even 2 bars, even 1 bar, you got to secure a copyright.
Sure.
It's a completely stupid system, but it is what it is.
Yeah, and then dealing with that, like who owns the copyrights to, those like that, the record company is still not around, but like who bought their catalog? Now you got to get with them and.
So there's not going to be two versions, but what I will do, and I'm kind of doing a little bit already in terms of acting as a kind of teaser, is the things that do not make the final cut. I will make some of those things available on the website.
Yeah.
So I really kind of consider the website, eventually when the book is there, I see it as a kind of companion website.
Yeah. That's cool.
Also, in the book, it's not going to say, okay, see my website for more information.
right, yeah.
It won't do, but I will do it on the website. I'll say, in my book, page whatever, I say this.
Sure.
But, this is something else that happened at the same time. Here's another anecdote that happened. So if you kind of combine it, then you do get the full picture, more or less.
Yeah. What's kind of a projected release date for that? Are they waiting on you to trim down the book and then it gets okayed? And are you doing that recall process right now, or is there like a projected release date?
So it's all rather new. I signed the contract late March of this year.
Congratulations!
And I now have about 1 year. I have until April 22, and that's my due date.
Okay,
but that's the date when they get the rough version, so to speak. And then typically for academic books, it then goes to external reviewers who check it for accuracy and if they don't agree with certain hypotheses, etc.
Sure.
And then it goes back to you. So it's a long process. I have no idea how long it will really take. I have been told, unfortunately, that Oxford University Press is a slow publisher.
Okay.
In spite of them being very prestigious and having so many books published every year, they work really slow. So I'm rushing it. I'm trying to write every day a little bit or rewrite because, I'm working from the basis of the dissertation. So I hope to be able to finish it earlier than April. Mm-hmm. And hopefully that can speed up the process a bit. But yeah, the best I can say is at the very, very least, it's going to be a year. But it's probably going to take longer in terms of them, being able to kind of put everything together with the reviewers and the whole production process.
Have you taken the material and just done lectures on it?
I gave some presentations in the past at academic conferences, but also at Jazz Education Network conference. ISB, I've been to ISB, International Society of Bassists conference once or twice. I can't even remember. There was one that was really cool. It was at Fort Collins. I think that was 2014 or 15 in Colorado. That was really cool because there were a number of bassists. Peter Dominguez from Oberlin, John Clayton, and whatnot.
Yeah. Did Clayton ever invite you out to come do it at USC?
No, he didn't.
That'd be cool.
No, he should.
Damn it, John Clayton! Damn it!
we even speak the same language.
Yeah.
He's married to a Dutch woman, so he can understand. Each time I don't see him often, obviously, because he lives somewhere in. Actually, I think he lives in Colorado or somewhere Rocky Mountains kind of
Clayton
region. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I thought he was out here because he teaches at USC.
Or maybe he is. Maybe it's just his second home.
Good for him.
I don't see him that often, but when I do see him, he probably doesn't recognize me. Each time I go up to him and I introduce myself in Dutch, you don't do that, but with him, why not? And then next time he's like, oh, you speak Dutch? Wow, that's of course. I'm from Belgium. Half of the country speaks Dutch anyhow. No, but that was a particular moment because I kind of walked up to him and said like, hey, listen, I'm doing this research on Blanton and I got something really cool to show you. And this is something that not a lot of people know, but there actually isn't a lot of film material on Blanton, film footage.
Sure.
Even in terms of photographs, there's not a whole lot.
Right.
But I actually was able to track down somebody who owns a 16mm black and white silent movie, home movie. Those,
oh wow,
old home movies.
Yeah.
And somebody that actually filmed a performance of Jump for Joy, which is a musical review that Ellington composed and staged at the Mayan in LA.
Okay, yeah.
Mayan?
Yeah.
So, by the way, that's a historical site I visited. I not now it's a kind of dance club.
Yeah.
So going to the Mayan, that was kind of one of the venues where Blanton spent a lot of time. So
interesting.
And so he was the whole band was filmed at Mayan, and it's only maybe 10 minutes or so. And Blanton, you can see him like overall maybe 20-30 seconds.
Okay.
5 seconds here, 3 seconds there, and that was when I first saw that. By the way, I saw that in your neighborhood. I saw that in Venice, a collector in Venice.
Oh wow.
Yeah. It was.
Who's that? If you still got that guy's number, the information, I'd love to know that guy.
He's known within the world of jazz records because he's a big collector, and he's done a number of restoration projects, restoration and mastering. He's done a number of mosaic boxes.
Okay.
His name is Stephen Lasker.
Okay.
Yeah, he's an amazing guy, and he's like one of the encyclopedias on Ellington. Even today, he sometimes mails me and says like, "Hey, I think that you got the date wrong there," and like,
oh wow,
like it was not the 14th, it was the 15th actually. Oh yeah, okay,
okay, great. I mean, but that's kind of cool that, hopefully he wasn't being rude about it, but like someone who's going to kind of come alongside and help you validate a lot of these things.
I actually had a number of people like Stephen Lasker is another guy, Ken Steiner, who's up in Seattle, who really was helpful in just sharing some of his knowledge and some of the research that they had already done in Blanton, and very graciously sharing that with me.
Yeah,
kind of at first being a bit like, who are you and why should we share it with you? I mean, we did the work, etc. And I totally understand. But once they kind of realized how serious I was and that I wanted to tackle this project in the right way,
sure,
with all credit where credit's due. That's the moment when they started sharing some of their stuff. Yeah. And Stephen even drove me up to some small place between LA and San Francisco, where I was able to meet a woman who was already in her 90s. She's no longer among us, called Claire Gordon, and is the only woman or the only person really that I was able to interview that actually had seen and met Blanton and talked to him and spent time with him in real life.
What was her relationship with him?
She actually kind of hung out with the Ellington band.
Okay.
Later on, she, for a brief time, became a secretary of the band, but at that particular point, not yet.
Okay.
She just kind of hung out with the band, and she became friends with some of them, like Rex Stewart, the trumpet player, a really good friend of hers, and actually. I think they co-wrote his autobiography, if memory serves. And she kind of hung out with the band, and then when Blanton was hospitalized, when he he contracted tuberculosis and went through a whole series of medical institutions until finally he was placed in a sanatorium in Duarte, somewhere outside of LA at that time.
It's like east. Like, so if you have LA like proper, Duarte is like kind of northeast, not far. It's it's from like downtown LA. It's maybe like, I don't know, 40 minutes. Like it's all very close, but it's like, I wouldn't drive there, if unless I had a reason to go. Like, it's far enough from me, but it's close to Los Angeles in general. Yeah.
So, well, in any event, she actually drove out to the sanatorium a couple of times to come and visit him, because the band had to travel on, so they were gone, And then all of a sudden, there's this kid. He's 23, and he's all alone in this place, and none of his friends, or not a lot of his friends anyhow, are still there. So she was one of his semi-regular visitors, if you will.
What were the accounts of his personality? Like, was he, I kind of assume him, and I don't know why, but I assume him to be kind of a quiet, humble guy.
Yeah, I think that's a really apt description. Like Claire even put it a little bit stronger in the sense that, he was a completely closed person. He wouldn't say a lot, and he wouldn't speak unless he was spoken to. Now she was white, and she was a woman, so she did feel that perhaps there was this kind of Blanton had grown up in the deep south, so being in the company of a white woman, it was, you had to be careful. So maybe that's not a completely accurate characterization. That was what she kind of experienced while she was around him, but by all means he was a soft-spoken person. He was deeply invested in his instrument. Like, there are accounts of where he wasn't on stage and had to go and find him, and then they found him somewhere in the basement practicing. Always when he could, he was out there jamming. Very often together with his really close friends, which seems like the completely opposite character, Ben Webster, tenor saxophonist Ben Webster, whose one of his nicknames was the Brute. So
right.
It tells us something.
Yeah, right. There's a lot of insight just right there. But they kind of they had a kind of father-son relationship almost. Okay.
They were really good friends. Lee Young, who was kind of one of the regulars on the LA scene, was also a good friend. He's the brother of Lester. And then Billy Strayhorn was also a good friend. And they kind of probably had a lot in common in terms of character. Billy Strayhorn was also kind of a soft-spoken and really charming, kind of shy person. And that's definitely a characterization that applies to Blanton as well.
And I might be confusing Blanton with someone else, because I remember when I was doing my little research curiosity thing about it, was Jimmie's dad white, or am I thinking of another bass player? Because I researched a bunch of different guys when doing that, and one of them had a white father. Charles Mingus who had a white father. That's possible. I don't remember writing about Mingus in that. I think I had just gone back further. I went back into like Pops Foster, Wellman. All like the early guys, and I remember somebody had a white father, but I couldn't remember if it was Jimmie or not. Well, it definitely wasn't Jimmie. But he does have a really interesting heritage. A lot of his ancestors, there's a lot of mixed races in there. Sure. He did have some, and you have to forgive me, I don't have the exact family tree in my head, but
there was somewhere, like I'm gonna say, like a great grandfather who was white, who actually was Jewish, but he also had a Native American ancestry. So some of his ancestors, like the great. Let's see, that's a grandfather, great grandfather, yeah. I think from both sides, actually, both maternal and paternal, had, I think were Cherokee, actually.
Interesting. Okay.
If memory serves. Yeah. I mean,
is that the main presence around the Tennessee area, the Chattanooga area? Or like in the South? Like, I don't know where Cherokee... Like, I'm from Arizona, and so I remember the Native American tribes that were kind of around the Arizona area.
Yeah.
But I don't know really like what each one's jurisdiction was, if they had stronger presence at different places in America or any of that. Like, I would be curious about that. Like, what was the Cherokee presence, over in the Tennessee area?
Yeah. Well, the thing is that it wasn't necessarily from Tennessee. So his great grandfather actually was a Cherokee, but he came from North Carolina.
Okay.
And I'm trying to find it as we speak in my dissertation. So I had so there's probably what is this? So probably one of these, trying to figure it out. Jimmie's his great grandmother actually was a slave. And she worked in a household near Stone Mountain in Georgia.
Okay.
And she actually married a member of the Cherokee Nation.
Okay.
So in both instances, both sides, maternal and paternal, there's a connection to the Cherokee Nation. But on the one hand, Georgia, and on the other, North Carolina.
I see.
And they had to move because of the Indian Removal Act. So they couldn't stay in Georgia, and we're not able to reconstruct the whole kind of way they traveled around, but eventually both sides of the family wound up in Chattanooga.
Okay. Yeah, I remember at one point I was curious about his school, and I looked up the school records of where he went in Tennessee and tried to find out who the instructor was and all that stuff. And and maybe you'd agree. It's fun to go back and connect with that, and you're looking at these programs. I'm blanking on the term. Whatever it would be, where you select your courses and all that from this. Yeah. I'm into it. I'm super into it. Man, thank you. On behalf of myself and hopefully the bass community, I thank you for putting this together. That is a lot of work, and I don't know of anything else out there that's similar to that. That's that deep of a dive on Blanton. That's awesome.
That was the whole idea, basically. I wanted to know more about Blanton. I didn't find a lot, so
sure, do it yourself.
Do it yourself. I mean, but I definitely hope that I still kind of regularly see things written about Blanton where I think, that's not really it, or you're kind of missing the point, or that's not true. And I do hope that the book kind of, when it comes out, helps a lot of people to understand not just Blanton, but like that whole community of bassists and the Ellington band and his family surrounding.
And everybody, they kind of came out of that with Oscar Pettiford and Ray Brown, and all the people that were direct kind of Blanton disciples.
Absolutely, yeah. That's something that I do a number of times. Like, connect to later bassists and say, like, this is something that he introduced, and then it was picked up by Ray Brown and
sure.
OP
Yeah,
and,
Slam Stewart, the stuff with the bow, like all that stuff.
Yeah. And I try to make it as concrete as possible. This is what Blanton does, and now go check out Ray Brown on this record because he does the same thing. And
right.
To make that concrete. Again, provided that it all fits within the strict framework that I've been given by Oxford.
Sure. Sure. Cool, man. Thanks for your time. What else are you working on research-wise before we wrap it up?
Yeah, okay. So I am now I'm not finishing up, but I'm the jazz competitions project is definitely my main project. But at this point, I'm kind of starting to dig into something that connects my interest into history, but also connects it to kind of today. And that's historical recreation, but in jazz and popular music. So, historically informed performance is a term that classical bassists and classical performers know, because it's like this whole idea of playing with gut strings and the kind of the Dragonetti bow and whatnot. What I'm interested in is how kind of performers negotiate their creative agency as they recreate or reenact historical repertoire, historical bands, and whatnot. So that's kind of the idea that I have now, and that I'm, very soon or soonish anyhow, will commit to paper and start kind of digging into and delving out and see what comes out, really.
Yeah, that's cool, man. Stay in touch. And definitely once Oxford gets it together and gets the book out, I want to know about it. I want to read it.
Okay, will do. Okay.
All right. Thanks so much, man.
Okay, thank you so much for hosting me.
Oh, yeah.
And all my best.
I think it was really cool that he got to connect with Blanton's sister and also Richard Davis, right? I love that. I love the Richard Davis, that he was able to connect with Richard Davis, another figure in jazz history and bass history, to learn even more. So it's really the lineage of it all, like learning from the people who were, in it and around it. And I love that stuff. I absolutely love that stuff. Again, I will be talking more about the book as it comes out. The book, again, is Revolutionizing the Jazz Bass, The Life and Music of Jimmie Blanton. And you can go to Matt's website to learn more, mattheyman.com. If you are enjoying the Bass Shed podcast, please subscribe on wherever you are listening to it. You can also follow the Bass Shed on Facebook at /The Bass Shed, on Instagram at The Bass Shed, and Twitter at Bass Shed. That's about all I got. I think I'm out of plugs, right? I'm out of stuff to plug. That's all I got, folks. I will catch you on the next one in a minute.